In the quiet town of Cedar Creek, nestled in the misty foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, life moved at a pace as gentle as the morning fog. People knew their neighbors, trusted their routines, and rarely looked twice at the things they passed every day. But one April morning, something changed. A figure, silent, elusive, began to appear near the storm drains behind the shops. A bobcat. Thin, restless, and behaving in a way no one could quite explain. It came at dawn and again at dusk, pacing, watching, always returning to the same spot with quiet desperation. To most, it was just a fleeting glimpse of nature pushing into the edges of town. But to Annie Caldwell, a lifelong local with a sharp eye and a softer heart, it was something different about this bobcat. Something in its desperate movements. What was this wild creature searching for? Why did it return to the storm drain day after day, as if tethered by invisible threads of instinct and heartbreak? What she found inside that dark, forgotten tunnel would not only shock the townspeople, but also became the beginning of a miracle. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The early morning fog hung low over Cedar Creek, a small town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia. Annie Caldwell pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she made her way down Main Street toward Guthrie's butcher shop, where she had worked for the past 15 years. At 58, Annie found comfort in routine. The same walk to work each morning, the familiar nod to Mrs. Patterson watering her geraniums, and the comforting smell of freshly ground coffee wafting from Harmon's diner. But this April morning felt different. The town had been battered by spring storms for nearly 2 weeks, leaving the ground saturated and the creek swollen beyond its banks. Cleanup crews were still working to clear fallen branches and repair damaged power lines. Annie sidestepped a particularly deep puddle, grateful that the rain had finally stopped 3 days ago. As she rounded the corner near the old post office, something caught her eye. A flash of tawny fur and a bobbed tail disappearing behind the dumpster at the edge of the municipal parking lot. Annie paused, squinting in the misty light. Wildlife sightings weren't uncommon in Cedar Creek, with the national forest just beyond the town limits. But it was unusual to see a wild animal venturing this close to the busiest part of town. Was that a bobcat? She murmured to herself, moving cautiously toward the dumpster. She peered around the edge just in time to see the animal, unmistakably a bobcat, slinking along the chain-link fence that bordered the small drainage canal running behind the shops. Annie had always found bobcats fascinating. They were elusive creatures that rarely allowed themselves to be seen by humans. This one, however, seemed different. Even from a distance, Annie could tell the animal was thin, its normally robust frame looking almost gaunt. The bobcat paused near a storm drain, lowering its head to peer intently through the metal grate before moving on. There was something almost desperate in the way it moved. A far cry from the confident, powerful predator Annie had occasionally glimpsed in the woods behind her small house on the outskirts of town. Throughout her shift at the butcher shop, Annie found her thoughts returning to the bobcat. When her boss, Frank Guthrie, noticed her distraction as she trimmed a rack of lamb, he raised a bushy eyebrow. "Something on your mind, Annie? You've been 1,000,000 miles away all morning." Annie explained what she had seen, describing the bobcat's concerning appearance. Frank, a lifelong hunter and outdoorsman, nodded thoughtfully as he wiped his hands on his apron. "Probably a female," he said. "This time of year, they might have kittens. Makes them take risks they normally wouldn't. Hunger will do that." When Annie's shift ended in the late afternoon, she found herself taking a detour past the municipal parking lot instead of heading directly home. To her surprise, the Bobcat was back, this time crouched near the entrance to the same storm drain, pacing back and forth with evident agitation. As Annie watched from a safe distance, the animal lowered itself onto its belly and stretched a paw toward the drain opening, as if trying to reach something inside. A sudden understanding struck Annie. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "Are there babies down there?" The Bobcat's ears twitched at the sound of Annie's voice, and it turned to look at her, amber eyes reflecting a mixture of wariness and desperation that made Annie's heart clench. For a long moment, they regarded each other, woman and wild animal, connected by an unspoken understanding. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the Bobcat darted away, disappearing into the underbrush that lined the drainage canal. Annie stood for several minutes, her mind racing. If there were indeed bobcat kittens trapped in that drain, they wouldn't survive long without help. But she also knew better than to approach a storm drain alone or to interfere with wildlife without proper expertise. The next morning, Annie arrived at work earlier than usual, her tote bag heavier than normal. Frank looked up from where he was grinding fresh sausage. "Frank," Annie began hesitantly, "I was wondering if I could have some of the beef trimmings and organ meat you usually throw out." Frank's eyebrows shot up. "Taking up exotic cooking, Annie?" She explained about the Bobcat and her suspicions about the storm drain. "I thought maybe if I left some food, I could at least help keep the mother alive while I figure out who to call about the kittens." To her relief, Frank didn't laugh or dismiss her concerns. Instead, he nodded and went to the walk-in cooler, returning with a paper-wrapped package. "Liver, heart, and some beef scraps," he explained. "If you're right about those kittens, their mama's gonna need all the help she can get." After her shift, Annie made her way back to the storm drain, the package of meat secured in her bag. The area was quiet, with no sign of the Bobcat. Carefully, Annie placed several pieces of meat on a flat rock about 20 feet from the drain, then retreated to watch from behind her car in the parking lot. It took nearly an hour before the Bobcat appeared, slinking cautiously from the underbrush. The animal sniffed the air, clearly detecting the meat, but wary of a trap. Finally, hunger won out over caution. The Bobcat approached the offerings, quickly grabbed a large piece of liver in its mouth, and, to Annie's surprise, immediately carried it to the storm drain rather than eating it. The Bobcat dropped the meat through the grate, then returned for another piece, which it ate quickly before grabbing more to deliver to the drain. "I knew it," Annie whispered to herself, feeling a mix of vindication and concern. Those poor babies. Over the next 3 days, Annie established a routine. Each morning and evening, she would leave food for the Bobcat, watching as the animal divided each offering between itself and whatever was in the drain. The Bobcat seemed to be growing slightly less wary of Annie's presence, though it still maintained a cautious distance. On the 4th day, Annie decided it was time to see exactly what she was dealing with. She arrived at the storm drain early in the morning, before the town was fully awake. The Bobcat was nowhere in sight. Probably hunting in the nearby woods, Annie guessed. Gathering her courage, she approached the drain and knelt beside it, peering through the metal grate. At first, she saw nothing in the darkness below. Then, a small movement caught her eye, followed by a tiny, pitiful mewling sound that made her heart constrict. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Annie could make out several small forms huddled together in the concrete tunnel. 5 bobcat kittens, their spotted fur matted and dirty, their eyes wide with fear at her presence. "Oh, you poor things," Annie breathed. The kittens couldn't be more than a few weeks old, far too young to survive on their own. The storm drain was about 6 feet deep, with smooth concrete walls impossible for the kittens to climb. Annie realized they must have fallen in during the recent flooding, perhaps washed away from their den when the drainage canals overflowed. A soft growl behind her made Annie turn sharply. The mother bobcat stood about 15 feet away, a small bird clutched in her jaws, her posture rigid with protective instinct. "I'm not going to hurt them," Annie said softly, slowly rising and backing away from the drain. "But they need more help than you can give them, Mama." Back home, Annie spent the evening researching wildlife rescue organizations. She finally found the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center, which specialized in the rehabilitation of native Virginia wildlife. When she explained the situation to the woman who answered the phone, the response was immediate concern. "Bobcat kittens in a storm drain? How long have they been there?" asked the woman, who introduced herself as Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the center's veterinarian. "I'm not sure, but at least 4 days since I first noticed the mother," Annie replied. "Probably longer. We had severe flooding last week." "This is very concerning," Dr. Rodriguez said. "If they've been trapped that long, they could be suffering from exposure, dehydration, and malnutrition, even with the mother trying to feed them. We need to get them out as soon as possible." The rescue was scheduled for the following morning. Annie arrived at the storm drain at dawn to find 2 vehicles already parked nearby. A van with the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center logo and a municipal works truck. Dr. Rodriguez, a petite woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, was conferring with a city worker about the best way to remove the drain cover. "You must be Annie," Dr. Rodriguez said, extending her hand. "Thank you for calling us. So many people would have just ignored this situation or called animal control to trap the mother as a nuisance." Annie shook her hand. "I couldn't just leave them there. The poor mother has been desperately trying to care for them. Speaking of which, we need to be prepared for her to return," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Bobcats are incredibly protective of their young. My assistant, Jake, is a trained wildlife handler." She nodded toward a tall, bearded man who was removing equipment from the van. "He'll be ready with a catch pole and transport crate if we need to temporarily contain the mother." The city worker, a middle-aged man named Tom, who Annie recognized from around town, used a special tool to lift the heavy metal grate. As it came free, everyone gathered cautiously around the opening, and Jake shone a powerful flashlight into the drain. The 5 kittens were huddled together in a small, relatively dry section of the concrete pipe. They blinked in the sudden light, their tiny faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. "They're alive!" Annie exclaimed with relief. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, her expression professional but her eyes soft with compassion. "Yes, and they don't look as bad as I feared. Their mother has done an amazing job keeping them alive." Jake prepared a long-handled net and a soft-sided carrier. "I'll try to get them all at once to minimize stress," he explained to Annie. "The less time we spend here, the better for everyone, especially if Mama comes back." As if on cue, a warning growl emanated from the bushes along the drainage canal. The mother bobcat had returned and was crouched low, her ears flattened against her head, eyes fixed on the humans surrounding her kittens. "Nobody make any sudden movements," Dr. Rodriguez said calmly. "Tom, can you and Annie step back a bit to give her some space?" Annie and Tom retreated several yards while Dr. Rodriguez spoke in a soft, even tone, as if the bobcat could understand her reassurances. "We're helping your babies, Mama. Just a few more minutes." Jake worked quickly but gently, using the net to scoop up all 5 kittens in one careful motion. Their frightened mules triggered an immediate response from their mother, who darted forward a few steps before stopping, torn between protecting her young and avoiding the humans. "Got them," Jake said, transferring the kittens to the carrier. He stepped back from the drain, moving slowly and deliberately. Dr. Rodriguez approached the carrier and peered inside, quickly assessing the kittens. 3 males, 2 females, approximately 4 weeks old, she reported. They're dehydrated and underweight, but alert and responsive. No obvious injuries. The mother bobcat paced anxiously nearby, growling intermittently but maintaining her distance. Annie felt tears welling in her eyes as she watched the conflicted animal, understanding viscerally the depth of maternal instinct that had driven her to such extraordinary lengths to keep her kittens alive. "What happens now?" Annie asked softly. "Ideally, we'd reunite them with their mother," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Bobcat kittens have the best chance of survival when raised by their mother. But we can't simply release them here. They'd end up back in that drain or facing other urban hazards." "What about relocation?" Annie suggested. "I live at the edge of town, backed up against the national forest. There's a wooded area on my property with an old shed I never use. It would be a safe place for them to recover, away from the town but still protected." Dr. Rodriguez considered this. "That could work. We'd need to examine and treat the kittens first, make sure they're stable. Then we could create a temporary den in your shed, release the kittens there, and try to trap and relocate the mother to the same location." "You think she'd find them?" Annie asked. "Bobcats have an incredible sense of smell and remarkable determination," Dr. Rodriguez assured her. "From what you've told me about this mother, I have no doubt she'll find her way to her kittens." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. The kittens were transported to the wildlife center, where they received fluids for dehydration, treatment for parasites, and a thorough health check. Meanwhile, wildlife officials set up a humane trap near the storm drain, baited with fresh meat and the scent of her kittens. By the second evening, they had succeeded in capturing the mother bobcat. Annie received a call from Dr. Rodriguez around sunset. "We've got her," the veterinarian reported. "She's in good condition considering what she's been through, just underweight and exhausted. We're going to keep the family overnight for observation, and if all goes well, we can attempt the relocation tomorrow." Annie spent the morning preparing the old shed at the back of her property. Following Dr. Rodriguez's instructions, she cleaned it thoroughly and created a den-like space with straw and branches. She made sure the shed had multiple exit points but was secure enough to keep the family safe from immediate threats. When the Wildlife Center's van pulled up her long driveway around noon, Annie felt a flutter of nervous excitement. Dr. Rodriguez and Jake carefully carried 2 containers, a larger crate containing the sedated mother bobcat and a smaller one with the 5 kittens, now looking considerably more lively than when they'd been rescued. "We've given the mother a mild sedative," Dr. Rodriguez explained as they made their way to the shed. "It will wear off in about an hour, which gives us time to get the kittens settled and retreat to a safe distance." Inside the shed, Jake gently placed the kittens in the prepared den space. The tiny creatures sniffed their new surroundings curiously, but stayed huddled together, their spotted coats blending with the straw. Last, They positioned the crate with the mother bobcat near the kittens but facing away from them towards the shed door. When she wakes up, she'll be able to smell her kittens immediately, Dr. Rodriguez explained as they secured the shed door with a simple latch that could be opened from outside using a long rope. We'll pull the rope to open the door once we're at a safe distance, and when she's fully alert, her maternal instincts should take over. The three humans retreated to Annie's back porch, which offered a clear view of the shed about 100 yards away. Jake set up a spotting scope so they could observe from a distance that wouldn't stress the wild animals. "Now we wait, Doctor," Rodriguez said, accepting the cup of coffee Annie offered. It was nearly an hour before they saw any movement. Through the scope, they watched as the mother bobcat finally stirred, rising unsteadily to her feet. She appeared disoriented for a few moments, then froze, clearly catching the scent of her kittens. Her head swiveled until she spotted them in their straw nest. "Pull the rope now," Dr. Rodriguez instructed softly. Annie tugged gently, and the shed door swung open a few inches. The bobcat noticed immediately, her attention divided between the exit and her kittens. For several tense moments, she seemed torn between flight and reunion. Then, one of the kittens let out a small mewl, and the decision was made. The mother moved swiftly to her babies, sniffing each one thoroughly as if taking inventory. Apparently satisfied that all were present and unharmed, she settled beside them, allowing the hungry kittens to nurse for the first time since their ordeal began. "That's a good sign, Doctor," Rodriguez said, her professional demeanor softening with evident relief. "She's accepted them and the new den site. The hardest part is over." Over the following weeks, Annie maintained a respectful distance but kept careful watch over her wild tenants. The Wildlife Center provided supplemental food, which Annie left at the edge of the woods, far enough from the shed to avoid habituating the bobcats to human presence, but close enough to ensure the nursing mother had adequate nutrition. Dr. Rodriguez visited weekly to observe from afar and advise Annie on the family's progress. By early June, the kittens had grown remarkably and had begun venturing outside the shed under their mother's watchful eye. They practiced pouncing on leaves and wrestling with each other, building the skills they would need for survival. "They're right on track developmentally," Dr. Rodriguez told Annie during one of her visits. "The mother is teaching them hunting skills, and they're growing more independent each day. In another month or so, they'll be ready for full release into the forest." "Will they stay around here?" Annie asked, feeling unexpectedly attached to the wild family. "Bobcats typically establish territories of 1 to 5 square miles," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "The mother may keep this area as part of her range since it's proven safe and has good resources. The kittens will eventually disperse to establish their own territories, probably by late fall." When July arrived with its thick humidity and afternoon thunderstorms, the bobcat family spent less and less time near the shed. Annie would occasionally glimpse them at dawn or dusk, the mother leading her now adolescent offspring along the forest edge, their movements becoming more confident and predatory each day. One evening, as Annie sat on her back porch watching the fireflies rise from the meadow, she noticed movement at the tree line. The mother bobcat stood there alone, her tawny coat glowing in the last light of day. For several minutes, the wild animal gazed steadily at Annie, neither retreating nor approaching. In that moment of connection, Annie felt something profound pass between them. An acknowledgement, perhaps, of the unlikely alliance that had saved 5 young lives. Then, with a flick of her stubby tail, the bobcat turned and melted into the gathering darkness of the forest. By August, The Bobcat family had fully transitioned to wildlife, no longer using the shed and appearing only fleetingly in the deeper parts of the woods. Dr. Rodriguez officially declared the rehabilitation a complete success during her final visit. "You've done something remarkable here, Annie," she said as they shared iced tea on the porch. "Most people never get to witness the kind of dedication that Mother showed, let alone play a role in helping wild creatures overcome such odds." "I'm the lucky one," Annie replied, gazing out at the forest that had become home to her Bobcat family. "I've lived in Cedar Creek all my life, walked past that storm drain thousands of times without really seeing. Now I notice everything, every bird call, every rustle in the underbrush. It's like the world got bigger somehow." Dr. Rodriguez smiled knowingly. That's what these wild connections do for us. They remind us that we're part of something larger. That fall, when the leaves turned crimson and gold, Annie often walked the trails behind her house, always keeping an eye out for a glimpse of spotted fur or the flash of a bobbed tail. Sometimes, on very quiet mornings, she was rewarded with a sighting, most memorably, a young bobcat practicing its stalking skills on an oblivious squirrel. Annie knew she couldn't be certain it was one of her kittens, but in her heart, she chose to believe it was. The town of Cedar Creek changed too. The story of the storm drain rescue had spread, inspiring the city council to implement wildlife corridors and more ecologically sound drainage systems. Frank from the butcher shop became an unlikely donor to the wildlife center, providing weekly meat donations for their rehabilitation efforts. Local schools invited Dr. Rodriguez to give presentations about native wildlife, creating a new generation of conservation-minded citizens. As for Annie, she continued her quiet life working at the butcher shop, but with one significant change. She had begun volunteering at the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center on weekends, using her gentle patience to help other wild mothers and their youngsters find their way back to where they belonged. On cold winter nights, when the wind howled around her small house, Annie would sometimes think about the Bobcat mother and the extraordinary lengths she had gone to for her kittens. It reminded her of something her own mother used to say, that love, at its most elemental, was the same in all creatures. A fierce determination to protect what was precious, against whatever odds the world might present. And in the years that followed, whenever Annie passed a storm drain or caught the distant cry of a bobcat in the hills, she felt that connection renew itself. A thread woven between species, between the wild and the tame, between what is lost and what, against all odds, is found again.